If you enjoyed this audiobook, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Chapter 1. You already know how to read. You just forgot why. Part 1. The reader you used to be. There was a time when you didn't need a reason to read. You just did it. Think back far enough, and you can probably find it. A Saturday afternoon with no particular plans. A book cracked open on a bed or a floor or a patch of grass, and the slow, pleasant disappearance of everything around you. The afternoon light shifted. Someone called your name. You didn't hear them. You were somewhere else entirely, aboard a ship, inside a mystery, running through a forest that didn't exist anywhere except in those pages, and somehow, completely in your mind. That feeling was real. It wasn't a product of having more time or fewer responsibilities. It was what happened when a young person found that books could do something no other thing could. Take you fully out of one world and drop you, whole, into another. Most children who loved reading never announced it as a hobby. It wasn't a habit they built. It was just what they did when left alone with themselves. Think about the child you were and the books that found you. Maybe it was a series you read under the covers with a torch. Maybe it was a single story about a child not so different from you, living a life that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. Whatever it was, it mattered. It left a mark. And then, slowly, it got harder to hear that pull. School turned reading into assignments. Adulthood turned free time into a scarcity. The world got louder, not all at once, but gradually, the way a room fills with noise until you can't remember what quiet felt like. The books didn't go anywhere. You just started picking up other things first. Here's what's worth holding on to. You didn't lose the love of reading. You didn't outgrow it or abandon it as something childish. It got buried, under deadlines and responsibilities and 1,000 small distractions that feel urgent but aren't. The reader you were is still in there, a little impatient, honestly, waiting for you to remember them. Every adult who sighs and says, "I just don't read like I used to," is really saying something else. They're saying they miss who they were when they did. They miss the quiet, the absorption, the feeling of a world opening up inside a paperback. That person hasn't gone anywhere. They've just been waiting for you to come back. This isn't about guilt. You don't owe anyone a reading list or a yearly book count. This is about something quieter and more personal than that. The recognition that some part of you already knows what it feels like to be lost in a book, and that part of you is still hungry for it. The signal is still there. You just have to turn down the noise long enough to hear it again. Part 2. What busyness stole from you. Something was taken from you so gradually that you never noticed it leaving, and the thief was hiding in your pocket the whole time. Think about what your attention used to feel like. You could sit with a single thought. You could follow a long story across hours. You could be bored without immediately reaching for something to fix it. That capacity was real. It belonged to you. And then, over a stretch of years that felt entirely normal, it quietly shrank. Smartphones arrived, promising connection. Social media promised community. Streaming promised entertainment on demand. None of these things announced themselves as threats to your inner life. They were just convenient. Then they became constant. Then they became the default response to every quiet moment. The 2 seconds waiting for the lift. The 4 minutes before sleep. The idle Sunday afternoon that used to stretch out and breathe. What changed wasn't just how we spent time. It was what we became comfortable with. The brain is not a fixed machine. As Cal Newport argues in Deep Work, the ability to focus is more like a muscle than a switch. It grows with use and weakens without it. Every time we interrupted a slow thought with a fast scroll, we were quietly training ourselves to prefer the fast. Not because we chose it, because repetition is its own kind of choice. Busyness made this worse in a specific way. Somewhere in the last 2 decades, being busy became something to wear proudly. People stopped saying, "I'm fine," and started saying, "I'm flat out." Being stretched thin began to signal importance. And if you were busy, you were also justified. Justified in never sitting still, never finishing a long book, never following one idea past the point where it got difficult. Depth started to feel self-indulgent. Speed felt responsible. But there is a quiet difference between a life full of information and a life enriched by ideas. You can spend an entire evening reading headlines, watching short videos, and scrolling through takes, and feel, by the end of it, somehow both overstimulated and empty. Ideas are different. An idea you have actually sat with, turned over, argued against, and made your own. That stays. It changes how you see the next thing, and the thing after that. What busyness stole from you was not your time, it was your tolerance for slowness. And slowness is exactly what a book asks of you. This is not your fault. The systems that compete for your attention were built by teams of engineers whose only job was to make sure you could not look away. You were never the problem. You were the target. The honest thing to say is this. Your focus did not disappear. It was redirected, piece by piece, until sitting with a single page felt strangely difficult, even uncomfortable. That discomfort is not a sign that you have changed permanently. It is a sign that a skill has gone unused. And unused skills, when practiced again, come back. What was lost can be found. Not all at once, but book by book, page by page, 5 quiet minutes at a time. Part 3. The identity shift that changes everything. Two people can have the exact same goal and end up living completely different lives, simply because of the story they tell about who they are. Imagine two people. Call them Sarah and James. Both decide on the 1st of January that they want to read 20 books this year. Same goal, same number, same fresh energy at the start. By March, life has gotten harder for both of them. Work piled up. Sleep got shorter. The days started bleeding into each other. Sarah picked up her book one tired Tuesday night, looked at it, and thought, I'll get back to this when things calm down. James, equally exhausted, opened his to a random page, read 3 paragraphs, and put it down. Not because he had more time, but because in his mind, reading wasn't something he was trying to do, it was something he was. That difference between I want to read and I am a reader is not a small thing, it is everything. James Clear wrote about this in Atomic Habits, and the idea cuts straight to the heart of why so many habits fail. When your goal is the finish line, any obstacle between you and that line feels like failure. But when the habit is tied to your identity, a bad day doesn't break the streak. It just becomes a day where you showed up anyway, even briefly. Think about it this way. A person who smokes but is trying to quit is offered a cigarette. They say, no thanks, I'm trying to quit. A person who has truly made the identity shift says, no thanks, I don't smoke. Same words almost, completely different relationship to the choice. The same logic applies to reading. The person who is trying to read more needs motivation every single time. The person who is a reader just needs a page. And here's what makes this feel less like philosophy and more like something real. Identity isn't built in a single decision. You don't wake up one morning and declare yourself a reader and have it be true. Identity is built in tiny moments, one at a time. Every time you open a book, even for 2 minutes while the pasta boils, even for 1 page before your eyes give out, you cast a vote. You are saying, quietly and without drama, this is who I am. 2 minutes doesn't feel like much, but 2 minutes today, 2 minutes tomorrow, 2 minutes every day for a month, those votes add up. The evidence accumulates, and one day, without you quite noticing when it happened, I am a reader stops being something you're trying to believe and starts being something you simply know. Put this book down for a moment, if you want. Sit with that. Because here is what it means for you, right now. You don't need to finish a book a week. You don't need a perfect routine or a leather armchair or uninterrupted silence. You just need to keep showing up. Small, consistent, without apology. You open this book. That was a vote. That's another one. You are a reader. You just needed to remember it. Part 4. Your one true reason. Now that you know you are a reader, there is one question left, and it is the only one that actually matters. Why do you want to read? Not the answer you would give if someone asked you at a dinner party. Not to be more informed or to improve myself. Those answers are fine, but they are borrowed. They belong to a vague, socially acceptable version of you. The real answer lives somewhere quieter and more specific, and it is the only one with enough power to keep you turning pages on the nights when everything else is pulling you away. Think about a woman named Sarah. She picked up a book on human psychology after years of feeling like she could not connect with her teenage daughter. Not because a productivity guru told her to read more, because she was scared of losing her child to silence and distance. That fear, that very specific personal ache, sent her through 12 books in 8 months. She didn't track her progress. She didn't need to. The reason was too real to forget. Or take Marcus, a man who worked night shifts and came home wired and exhausted at the same time. He started reading for 15 minutes before sleep, not to become smarter, but because it was the only thing that quieted his mind enough to let him rest. Reading was not self-improvement for Marcus. It was medicine. Both Sarah and Marcus had found their one true reason. And here's what happens when you find yours. The habit stops feeling like discipline. It starts feeling like relief. Research from the University of Sussex found that reading for just 6 minutes reduced participants' stress levels by 68%, more than listening to music or taking a walk. The mind absorbs itself in a book, and in doing so, steps back from whatever was pressing on it. This is not a coincidence. It is the reason so many people who read consistently describe it as one of the few things in their day that is entirely theirs. But the reason does not have to be peace. Maybe yours is hunger, to understand how the world works, why people do what they do, where history took a wrong turn. Maybe it is loneliness, and books are the only place where you have ever truly felt understood. Maybe it is your children. You want them to see you reading, to grow up in a house where books are ordinary and beloved. Maybe it is ambition, or grief, or curiosity so restless it never quite finds enough to feed it. None of these reasons are wrong. All of them are stronger than "I should read more." Motivation built on should is borrowed willpower. It works for a few days and then collapses the moment life gets inconvenient, which is always. Motivation built on something you genuinely long for behaves differently. It bends when tired, but doesn't break. It finds a way back, even after weeks away, because the need underneath it is still there. So, before you move into the practical chapters ahead, before routines and habits and all the tools that will follow, sit with this question for a moment. Not the first answer that comes up, but the one underneath it. Ask yourself honestly, what would reading more actually give me? What am I really looking for? Write it down if you can. One sentence. Make it specific and true and entirely yours. That sentence is your foundation. Everything else in this book is built on top of it. Chapter 2. Make the book impossible to ignore. Part 1. The book on the pillow trick. The books you read are almost always the books you can see. And that one simple truth explains more about your reading life than any lack of discipline ever could. Think about the last time you scrolled through your phone for 20 minutes before bed. Was the phone the better option? Probably not, but it was right there. It was warm and glowing and asking nothing of you. The book, meanwhile, was on the shelf across the room, or under a pile of things on the desk, or somewhere you'd have to actually get up and find. The phone didn't win because you're weak. It won because it was closer. B.J. Fogg, a behavioral scientist at Stanford, spent years studying why people do what they do. One of his clearest findings is this: the harder a behavior is to start, the less often you do it. Even tiny amounts of friction, an extra click, an extra step, an extra room, are enough to kill a habit before it begins. This is not a moral failure. It is just how human beings are wired. We follow the path of least resistance, always. The trick is to make that path lead somewhere worth going. So here is the book on the pillow trick. Put your current book on your pillow in the morning when you make your bed. That's it. Tonight, when you pull back the covers, it'll be right there waiting. No searching, no deciding, no effort. Just a book in your hand before you've even thought about your phone. One woman named Rachel, a teacher and mother of two, had been trying to read more for years. She owned dozens of books. She just never seemed to read them. A friend told her to stop trying harder and start thinking about her furniture. She moved a small bookshelf next to her sofa. She put a book on the kitchen counter beside the kettle. She kept a paperback in her handbag. She didn't change her schedule. She didn't wake up earlier. She just made books hard to avoid. Within 3 months, she had finished 7 books. The same woman, the same life, different furniture. You can do something similar. Look at your home right now, or picture it. Where do you sit and wait? Where do you eat alone? Where do you stand for a few idle minutes each day? Those spots are reading opportunities wearing the costume of dead time. Put a book in each one. If a dedicated reading chair sounds appealing, try it. Pick one chair in your home and decide it is only for reading. No phones, no TV, no eating, just books. Over time, sitting in that chair will start to feel like reading, the way sitting at a desk starts to feel like work. The space trains the brain. You don't need a perfect environment. You just need books where your eyes already land. Start there, and the habit will follow. Part 2. The 5-minute door. Most people never finish a book because they're waiting for a Saturday afternoon that never quite arrives. Think about the last time you told yourself you'd read when things calm down. How long ago was that? The 2-hour window feels like the only window worth using. Anything less feels like a waste of effort. But that thinking is the very thing keeping you from reading a single page. This is perfectionism in disguise. It sounds reasonable. I want to give the book my full attention. But what it really means is, if I can't do it perfectly, I won't do it at all. And so the book sits on the nightstand, and weeks pass, and you feel quietly guilty every time you see the spine. Here is what the science actually says. Small actions done consistently carve deeper grooves in the brain than large actions done occasionally. A researcher who reads 5 pages every single day is building a stronger habit architecture than someone who reads 50 pages on a Sunday once a fortnight. Frequency matters more than duration. Regularity matters more than volume. James Clear describes a version of this in Atomic Habits, the 2-minute rule. When you want to build a habit, shrink it down until it takes almost no effort to start. For reading, that means your only real commitment is to open the book. That's it. Open it. You don't promise yourself an hour, you don't promise yourself a chapter, you just open it. What happens next will surprise you. Almost every time you open the book, you read more than you planned, because starting is the hard part. The rest tends to take care of itself. Now consider the numbers. 5 pages a day sounds almost laughably small. But 5 pages a day is 1,825 pages a year. That is 6 decent-sized books. 6 full books read by someone who never has time to read, all from 5 pages a day. Picture this, a woman named Claire, a nurse with 2 kids and a commute, who started keeping a paperback in her scrubs pocket. She read 2 pages waiting for the kettle in the morning, 3 pages in the car before walking into the school to pick up her kids. She wasn't doing it to be impressive, she was just using the tiny gaps. 8 months later, she had finished 4 books, more than in the previous 3 years combined. 5 minutes before bed, 5 minutes waiting for the bus, 5 minutes sitting in the driveway after a long day before you go inside and become everyone's person again. These moments exist in your life right now. They are not nothing, they are the 5-minute door. You don't need a clear schedule, you don't need silence, you don't need to be in the mood, you just need to open the book. The door is there every single day, the only question is whether you'll step through it. Part 3. Stack it on something you already do. You already do dozens of things every single day without thinking, and hidden inside those routines is all the reading time you claimed you didn't have. Think about your morning coffee. You make it, you sit down, and for 5 or 10 minutes you stare at your phone or the wall. That moment already exists. It already belongs to you. The only thing missing is a book on the table next to the mug. James Clear calls this habit stacking, attaching a new behavior to one you already perform automatically. The existing habit acts like an anchor, and the new one clips onto it. No willpower required, no scheduling. The old habit carries the new one forward on its own momentum. The reason this works comes down to how the brain is wired. Every habit you already have, making coffee, commuting, eating lunch, picking up your kids, has been carved into strong neural pathways through repetition. Your brain barely has to think to do these things. When you attach reading to one of them, you borrow that same automatic energy. The book stops being a task you have to remember to do. It becomes part of something you were already going to do anyway. A woman named Sandra, a nurse and mother of 2, swore she had no reading time. But when she mapped out her day honestly, she found 3 solid anchors: her morning coffee before her family woke up, her lunch break eaten alone in the staff room, and the 15 minutes she sat in the car, waiting for school pickup. She stacked a book onto each one. Within 6 weeks she had finished 2 novels, the first she had read in 4 years. The commute deserves special attention here. If you drive, walk, or take public transport, you have a reading opportunity you may be ignoring. This is where audiobooks earn their place, and they earn it fully. Some readers feel guilty about audiobooks, as if listening is somehow cheating. It is not. The ideas enter your mind, the stories move you, the knowledge sticks. For many people, especially those who haven't read in years, an audiobook is the single most powerful way back into the habit. You're not a lesser reader for using your ears instead of your eyes. Think right now about your own day. Not the ideal version of your day, the real one. What do you always do in the morning? What happens at lunch? Where do you wait, sit, or commute? Pick just one of those moments, one anchor. Stack a book onto it starting tomorrow. Not forever, not as a lifelong commitment. Just tomorrow. That's it. One moment, one book. That's the whole exercise. And if it feels less like homework and more like slipping a small, quiet pleasure into a gap that was wasted before, that's because it is exactly that. Part 4. Winning the morning before the world wakes up. Now, stacking a habit onto your existing routine is one thing. But there is a window in the day that belongs to a different category entirely. Most people hand their mornings away without realizing it. The alarm goes off, the phone comes up, and within 60 seconds, the brain is already flooded. News, messages, notifications, someone else's emergency. The day has begun, but not on your terms. You were claimed before you even got out of bed. There is a different way to use those first quiet minutes. Not a rigid 5-step routine, not a productivity system, just a book, a warm drink, and the particular stillness that exists before the world remembers you're there. Neuroscience backs this up in interesting ways. After sleep, the brain is rested, the prefrontal cortex is fresh, and the mental noise that builds through the day hasn't started yet. Ideas absorbed in that early window tend to stick better. They have room to land somewhere. A reader who spends 20 minutes with a book at 6 a.m. is often surprised by how vividly they remember it, compared to the same 20 minutes snatched at 9 p.m., when the brain is running on fumes. Marcus, a secondary school teacher in his late 30s, used to spend the first 20 minutes of his morning scrolling. He described it later as eating junk before breakfast. I wasn't enjoying it, I was just doing it. He moved his phone to the kitchen, left a book on his nightstand, and replaced the scroll with reading. He didn't wake up earlier, he didn't change anything else. What changed, he said, was the texture of his entire day. He arrived at work feeling like himself, rather than already behind. But here's the honest part. Not everyone owns their mornings. Shift workers, parents of young children, people with chaotic households. The idea of a peaceful sunrise reading ritual can feel like a cruel joke. If that's you, this is not a message that your mornings are wrong. The principle has nothing to do with the clock. The real idea is simpler. Find a time that belongs only to you before the demands start arriving. For some people that is 6 a.m. For others it is 10 p.m. when the children are finally asleep and the house goes quiet. For others it is a lunch break spent alone in a car park. What matters is that you protect it, that you arrive to it before your phone does, that the book is there waiting and the world is, just for now, somewhere else. That protected time, practiced daily, changes something slowly and permanently. Not in a dramatic way, more like the difference between a room with one window and a room with four. The same space, more light. You think more clearly. You feel less reactive. You carry ideas with you through the day that are yours, not recycled from a feed. A reading life anchored by a daily ritual, even a small, imperfect one, feels, from the inside, like having a private room in your mind that no one else can enter. Calm, spacious, quietly yours. Chapter 3. Read slower to understand faster. Part 1. The illusion of reading. You finish the chapter. You turn the page. And somewhere between the first sentence and the last, your mind quietly left the building. It happens to almost every reader, and almost no one talks about it honestly. Your eyes moved across every line. You didn't skip a single word. And yet, if someone asked you right now what that chapter was about, you would feel a faint, embarrassing blankness. That is not a reading problem. That is a tension problem. And it is far more common than you think. Researchers who study learning have a name for what happens when we move through material without mentally engaging with it. Passive processing. And the evidence is clear. The brain does not store what it merely encounters. It stores what it works with. When you wrestle with an idea, question it, connect it to something you already know, or feel surprised by it, that is when memory forms. When you simply let words pass through your eyes, like scenery through a car window, almost none of it sticks. Think of it like eating a meal while scrolling through your phone. The food goes in, you clear the plate, but an hour later, you barely remember what you ate, let alone how it tasted. Passive reading works exactly like that. The pages go in, you reach the end, but the ideas are already gone. What made this worse is a culture that decided speed was the goal. Speed reading courses, book summaries, challenges to finish 50 books a year. The message was simple. More is better. But that is exactly backwards. A person who reads 12 books and carries nothing from them into their actual life has gained less than the person who reads 6 books and lets each one quietly shift the way they think, speak, or act. The number on the shelf is not the point. The change inside you is. Slow readers are not struggling readers. They are often the most engaged ones. The ones pausing to think, to disagree, to reread a sentence not because they missed it, but because it mattered. That friction is not failure. It is the feeling of understanding being built. The parts that follow give you specific practical tools to make reading active rather than passive. Ways to stay present with a book. Hold on to what you read and let ideas genuinely land. None of them require more time. They just require a different kind of attention. The kind you already know how to give when something truly has your interest. Part 2. Ask the book a question. Think about the last time you had a conversation that genuinely changed how you saw something. That is exactly what reading can be, if you let it. Most people treat a book like a lecture. You sit down, the author talks, you receive. You try to stay awake, you try to remember. But there is another way to read, one that feels less like being taught and more like thinking out loud with someone whose ideas genuinely interest you. Before you open the next chapter, pause for a few seconds and ask yourself, what do I think this is going to be about? What do I already believe on this topic? What would actually change my mind? These questions take 10 seconds to ask, but they do something remarkable. They put your brain on alert. Now you are not waiting to be told things. You are reading to find out if you were right. Think of it like meeting someone fascinating at a dinner party. You would not sit in silence while they monologue at you. You would ask questions. You would push back gently on something you disagreed with. You would follow a thread that surprised you. A book deserves exactly that same kind of attention. The author has an argument. You have a mind. Let them meet. As you read, keep asking small questions. Do I agree with this? What is the author using as evidence? Is it solid or shaky? Why does this part make me uncomfortable, or excited, or doubtful? These are not study questions. They are the natural responses of a person who is actually present with what they are reading. A woman named Sarah, a secondary school teacher, tried this approach after years of feeling like books slipped through her mind, like water through a sieve. She picked up a book on habit formation, and before opening the first chapter, she wrote one question in the margin of the cover page. Does this match what I already see in my students? She told a colleague afterward that the book suddenly came alive. The same words, the same pages, but she was no longer a passenger, she was a participant. That shift is the whole point. Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Doren wrote about this in How to Read a Book. The idea that reading well is an active transaction, not a passive one. You bring something to the page responds. Understanding is built between you, not delivered to you. The questions do not need to be clever. They do not need to be written down, though writing helps. They just need to be honest. What do I think? What am I feeling? Where do I agree? And where does something not quite sit right? When you read that way, the information stops feeling like someone else's ideas and starts feeling like your own thinking, sharpened against another person's. That is when books stop being books and start being conversations. And conversations, as you already know, are far harder to forget. Try it with the very chapter you read next, even this one. Part 3. The one-sentence rule. One simple sentence, written in your own words, can do more for your memory than 3 pages of highlighted notes ever will. After the last section asked you to bring your own questions to a book, this goes one step further. It asks you to bring your own answer out of it, compressed into a single sentence, in your own language, before you turn the page. Here's how it works. When you finish a chapter, you stop. You do not immediately move on. You sit with a quiet, slightly uncomfortable question. What was that actually about? Not what did the author say, not what stood out. What was the core of it? What would you tell someone if you had only 10 seconds? That effort, the squinting, the searching, the rejecting of the first 3 answers because they are not quite right, is the whole point. Researchers call it elaborative interrogation. When you force your brain to compress an idea into your own words, it has to decide what mattered and what did not. It has to let go of the stories and statistics and hold only the idea underneath them. That process of selection is how memory gets built, not by reading more slowly, by thinking more deliberately. Think of a reader named Priya. She picks up a chapter on decision-making, reads it carefully, finds it interesting. Then she pauses and tries to write one sentence. Her first attempt is vague. Her second borrows too much from the author. Our third, we make worse decisions when we're tired because we avoid the hard choice, not because we make the wrong one, clicks. It is hers. A week later, she still knows exactly what that chapter said, not because she has a good memory, because she did the work of understanding it before she moved on. That moment of clicking, when the sentence finally lands, is not just satisfying, it is the sound of something being stored properly. This practice also reveals something slightly uncomfortable. If you cannot write one sentence, you probably did not understand the chapter as well as you thought you did. The confusion is not a problem, it is information. Go back for 2 minutes, read the last few pages again, the fog usually lifts quickly. But without the one-sentence test, you would have carried that confusion forward without ever knowing it was there. Yes, this slows you down, by maybe 2 or 3 minutes per chapter. People often object to that, but the objection misunderstands the goal. You are not trying to finish the book, you are trying to keep it. A reader who moves through 20 chapters and retains 4 has done less than a reader who moves through 10 and carries all of them. The sentence does not need to be clever. It does not need to be beautiful. A rough, honest sentence that captures the idea in your own plain words is worth more than the most eloquent line borrowed from the author. Try it with the next chapter you read, even this one. What was it actually about? Say it out loud or write it down. One sentence, yours. Part 4. Rereading is a lie you tell yourself. Here is the hardest truth about rereading. It feels like learning, but it is mostly just comfort. When you go back over a page you've already read, the words feel familiar, the ideas feel clear. You think, yes, I know this, but that feeling of knowing is not the same as actually knowing. The brain is doing something sneaky. It is recognizing the words, not retrieving the ideas. Recognition is easy. Retrieval is work. And the brain, like most of us, will choose easy every time if you let it. The researchers behind Make It Stick, Peter Brown, Henry Roediger, and Mark McDaniel, spent years studying how people actually learn and remember. What they found was uncomfortable. Rereading is one of the least effective ways to retain information, yet it remains the most popular study strategy among students and readers worldwide. We do it because it feels productive. The fluency tricks us. We mistake a smooth read for a deep one. Think about the last book you reread a section of. Did you do it because you genuinely forgot the idea and needed it back? Or did you do it because it felt easier than trying to remember it without looking? That second reason is where most rereading lives. What actually works is retrieval. Closing the book and asking yourself what you just read, not with the text open, not by scanning your highlights. Eyes off the page, brain working alone, trying to pull the idea back up from wherever it landed. This struggle, the slight discomfort of not quite remembering, the effort of reaching for it, that is not a sign that you failed to learn. That is the learning itself happening in real time. Struggling to remember is not failure. It is the mechanism. Even a 5-minute pause at the end of a chapter, before moving on, before putting the book down, produces dramatically better retention than reading the same pages twice. You could close the book right now, look away, and ask, what were the last few pages actually about? That small act builds a memory that sticks. Rereading builds a feeling that fades. You can go further. Explain the idea to someone else. Apply it to a decision you are already facing, Write down what you remember before checking what you missed. These are acts of retrieval, and every one of them cements understanding in a way that passive rereading never will. The good news is that you can stop. Right now, with this reading, you have permission to stop going back over pages you have already read, and start closing the book and asking yourself what was there. It will feel harder at first. That is exactly why it works. Chapter 4. Let Books Change the Way You Live. Part 1. Steal Everything Worth Stealing. The best readers in history were not the most disciplined. They were the most shameless thieves. Austin Kleon wrote that creativity is really just collecting and connecting. That idea fits reading perfectly. The best readers do not sit quietly and receive a book. They raid it. They move through pages with their hands open, grabbing sentences that spark something, ideas that feel useful, questions that won't leave them alone. They take what belongs to a philosophy book and drag it into a conversation about biology. They pull a line from a novel and press it against something they read in a history book 3 months ago. They steal freely and without apology. This is exactly what the greatest minds throughout history did. Darwin kept notebooks stuffed with observations, theories, and ideas borrowed from other fields, including economics, which gave him the concept of competition that shaped his theory of evolution. Leonardo da Vinci filled thousands of notebook pages with stolen sparks from anatomy, engineering, painting, and mathematics, all crashing into each other. Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations not as original philosophy, but as a private collection of Stoic ideas he was borrowing and testing against his own life. None of them were simply finishing books and moving on. They were building something. That something is a commonplace book, a personal collection of ideas worth keeping. It does not need to be fancy. A notebook, a notes app, a folder of index cards. The format is irrelevant. What matters is that ideas from different books land in the same place, where they can meet each other. Because a sentence from a book about grief, next to a paragraph from a book about neuroscience, can produce a thought that neither book ever said out loud. That new thought is yours. You made it by reading widely and letting things collide. Most people read one book at a time, finish it, shelve it, and move to the next. Each book sits in isolation. But your reading life is not a sequence of separate events. It is one long, ongoing conversation with writers who lived across centuries and continents, all of them talking to each other through you. When you read chaotically, a novel, then a book on evolution, then a Roman philosopher, then a memoir, the unexpected connections are not noise. They are the point. The real treasure is almost never inside a single book. It lives in the gap between them. What idea from something you have already read keeps surfacing in your mind? That is a thread worth pulling. That is where your collection begins. You do not need to read more before you start. You already have material. Somewhere in the books you have already read, there are sentences that stayed with you, ideas that shifted something, questions you never quite answered. Write them down. Put them in one place. Let them talk to each other. The collection is waiting. Start stealing today. Part 2. The one thing you'll actually do. Most people finish a book feeling inspired, close it gently, and then do absolutely nothing different for the rest of their lives. It is not laziness. It is not a lack of intelligence. It is what happens when insight has no place to land. The ideas were real. The inspiration was genuine. But without a bridge to action, even the most powerful book fades into a pleasant memory within days. Think about the last book that genuinely moved you. Can you name one thing you did differently because of it? One conversation you had, one decision you changed, one habit you started? If the answer is no, the book entertained you. It did not change you. There is a difference, and it matters. Here is the practice. Before you close any book, not a week later, not when you feel ready, write down one thing. One specific concrete thing you will do because of what you just read. Not a list, not a set of intentions. One thing with a real deadline attached to it. A woman finished a book on communication. She had underlined half of it. She had highlighted passages about honest conversation, about saying hard things with care, about how silence in relationships compounds into distance. She felt deeply understood by the book. Then she thought about the email she had been avoiding for 3 weeks, a message to a colleague she had fallen out with, one she kept rewriting in her head but never sent. That night she sent it. It was imperfect. It was 2 paragraphs. The book did not write it. But without the book, she would not have sent it. That email was the book working. Everything else she highlighted was just decoration. Knowledge without a consequence is entertainment. There is nothing wrong with entertainment, but if you are reading to grow, you owe the book at least one real result. The reason most readers never get there is perfectionism. A good book offers 10 ideas worth applying. 15 if it is great. The reader feels the weight of all of them and thinks, I need to implement this properly before I move on, so they do nothing, because doing everything feels impossible. The pressure to honor the whole book stops them from honoring any of it. One thing breaks that. One thing is small enough to be real. It can be done this week, possibly today. It does not require a new system or a personality overhaul. It just requires a decision and a deadline. Over time, this practice does something remarkable. Your reading life stops being a collection of good intentions and starts producing actual evidence that you are changing. You read a book on sleep and you move your phone out of the bedroom that same night. You read a book on money and you set up the savings account you have been putting off for 2 years. Each book leaves a mark, not a highlighted page. That is what a reading life built on action feels like. Not more knowledge, a different life. Part 3. Teach it to someone who doesn't care. Now try explaining what you just read to someone who has absolutely no interest in it, and watch how quickly you discover what you actually understood. The physicist Richard Feynman had a simple test for whether he truly knew something. He would try to explain it in plain language, as if teaching a child. Wherever the explanation broke down, that was the gap. Not a gap in the material, a gap in his understanding. He called it a technique. Most people who use it call it humbling. Here is what actually happens when you try to explain a book to someone who did not ask to hear about it. You open your mouth, confident, and somewhere around the second sentence you hit a wall. You realize you memorized the words, but missed the meaning. You thought you understood the argument, but now that you are saying it aloud without the book in your hands, without the author's sentences to hide behind, you discover you are borrowing someone else's clarity. The moment you have to make it your own is the moment you find out whether it is truly yours. This is not a comfortable experience. It is, though, an incredibly useful one. The stumbling is not failure. The stumbling is the learning. When you grope for an analogy and accidentally invent one that works better than anything in the original book, that is your brain doing something real with the material. When you lose the thread and have to backtrack, you are identifying exactly what needs more thought. No highlighter in the world can do that for you. You do not need a willing audience for this to work. You need a tolerant one. A partner half watching television, a friend who will nod politely, a teenager who will give you 3 minutes before checking their phone. The quality of their attention is not the point. The quality of your explanation is. There is a side effect worth mentioning, though. People who bring ideas home, who arrive at dinner with something they just read about sleep or memory or ancient Rome and share it badly and enthusiastically, tend to become more interesting to be around over time. Not because they are showing off, because they are genuinely lit up by something. That quality, curiosity worn openly, is more attractive than most people realize. Research on learning consistently shows that teaching material to others produces better long-term retention than rereading, highlighting, or even taking detailed notes. The act of retrieval, of pulling information out and reshaping it for another person, is what moves an idea from short-term recognition to something that actually sticks. So after you close the next book, do not just decide on the one thing you will do. Find someone nearby and tell them what you read. Tell them badly. Make it up a little as you go. Fumble through the good parts. Their eyes may glaze. That is fine. Yours will not. Part 4. The reader you are becoming. The person you are becoming through books is not dramatic. The change is quiet, slow, and easy to miss until the day you suddenly notice it. You start asking better questions. Not smarter questions, better ones. The kind that come from having spent time inside other people's minds, other centuries, other struggles. You stop being so sure about things. That is not weakness. That is what reading does when it works. Empathy grows in strange ways through books. You spend an afternoon inside the head of a grieving father in a novel, a prisoner writing letters, a scientist who was wrong for 20 years before being right. You do not become them, but you become someone who has been there, briefly, and that changes how you see the person in front of you who is hurting in ways they cannot explain. Research by psychologist Raymond Marr at York University found that people who read fiction consistently score higher on tests of empathy and social understanding. The mind that has inhabited many lives is a more generous mind. Patience comes too, almost by accident. Reading trains you to sit with a thought, to let it develop, to wait for the point instead of skipping to it. In a world designed to reward the fastest reaction, that patience becomes something rare and genuinely useful. The thinking changes most of all. You begin to notice patterns across things that seem unrelated. A line from a history book about the fall of Rome suddenly explains something you saw at work last week. A paragraph about grief from a memoir helps you understand your own mood on a Tuesday in November. These are not coincidences. They are what happens when a mind has been fed widely and given time to connect. None of this comes from one book. It comes from the accumulation, from years of small sessions, awkward conversations, one-sentence summaries, stolen ideas, actions taken, books finished, and books abandoned halfway through. It comes from deciding quietly and repeatedly that this is who you are. A reader. You have already begun. You finished this book. That is not nothing. Every page you read was a small vote for the person you want to be. Someone who thinks carefully, feels deeply, and keeps showing up for the slow, rich work of understanding. Reading is not a productivity strategy. It is not a self-improvement plan. It is a way of being alive that is fuller and more awake than the alternative. The next book is waiting. You know how to open it. You know how to be present with it. You know what to do when you close it.